to welcome Mr. Jay Whitmire from the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center. Is that the official name, Jay?
It is. It's hard to get it. People start with Lombard, then there's Mennonite in there, there's Peace in there, but the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center, that's us.
And Jay is the director of this Halo Institution. I'll let him talk about what the Mennonite Peace Center does. But they actually come here periodically.
Yeah.
Is it once a year, Jay, would you say?
Well, we've used it a couple of times, so thank you for that.
Yes.
We spent a week in August here, and then in October, we were out in the bigger room for 3 days for, we call it an advanced clergy training program.
And we are always very honored to have them here. So I'm glad that specifically Jay could come to our adult formation this morning. And with all that, I'll go ahead and turn everything to you.
Great. We'll get started. We really wanted to come for this. My wife Sarah. I'm going to have to speak with my mask off. I apologize
No,
for that.
actually that's.
And I have my 4 shots, as you would dictate. I forgot about the flu shot, but I have that one as
You
well.
got 5? What's
Yeah,
the fifth?
5.
What's the 5th one?
The 5th one was shingles.
Shingles.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
I'll just briefly say my wife is a nurse manager that she does home health care with Advocate Aurora. And she's worked all over, but she's been working from the bedroom and occasionally our son's room these days. I'll get started, and I was really apologetic to Joanne that I couldn't put a lot of time and effort into preparation for this morning. I had a big training last week, and she said, no, if you say a few things, tell some stories, have some conversation, it'll be all right, and we'll go in that direction. But I would typically like to have something typed out and written out. But I'm going to begin, we're going to have 3 parts to it, but I'm going to begin with sort of I won't call it a devotional, but it's going to be a little bit along those lines. And where George began this morning is at the end of the gospel reading. What is truth? And I'm going to begin at the beginning of that reading, and then I'm going to explain it. But you know, Pilate enters the headquarters there, summons Jesus, and then says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus gives a very interesting answer. I know we're going to talk about my immigrants and neighbors and all of those issues, and that's where I'm going, but I'm going to set it up with this first. So Jesus asks this of Pilate, "Are you asking this on your own? Or did others tell you about me?" I want you to think about what he's actually asking at that point. It's not dissimilar to the time when Jesus was moving toward the end of his ministry. It's around the time of the Transfiguration in Matthew 16. But it's becoming apparent that Jesus is going to be crucified, or he's going to be killed, he's going to die. And he knows he has to train his disciples on this very point. And he's getting away from the big crowds and the healing and you know, all this. But then he asks his disciples, he says, "Well, who do the people say that I am?" You know, in the marketplace, because boy, the disciples love the marketplace. You know, they're fishermen. They like being into groups. They like talking to people, what's happening, getting the politics. They love that stuff, right? So who do the people say that I am? And then he turns and he says, "But who do you say I am?" So the answer is, of course, Elijah, John the Baptist, etc. But then he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And he's digging really deep. And I would finish this comment with what our sermon was this morning, quoting Soligard, who's got the truth? The minority has the truth, not the large herd, and making distinction. And Jesus is doing something very similar here. Is that a question you have, Pilate? Or are you just echoing what the crowd says? You see the difference? So what does the marketplace say about the Son of God? Peter, who do you think I am? And then the issues of belief. Now, I want to talk about the difference in that. There's one psychiatrist that we often quote from at the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center. His name is Dr. Murray Bowen. And Bowen talks about the difference between a pseudo-self and a solid self-belief. A pseudo-self and a solid self-belief. And much of life is the transition from this pseudo-belief that we pick up in our family, in our culture, from our friends, what we see on the radio. And as we begin to experience life, grow in life, really put the time and effort, we begin to change in our own thinking significantly. I want to go and give an example. Because when you start talking about immigration, neighborliness, cross-cultural stuff, bilingualism, you can get into the world of the pseudo-self pretty quickly, right? People will start angry, dogmatic, representative. They'll go this whole thing, and you'll think, boy, how much time and effort did you really put into that to come to that? It sounds like you're parroting a cause. Let me give you this example to try to illustrate it a little better. So I did a eulogy for my mother-in-law, Sarah's mother, this summer. And eulogies are hard. But what eulogies do, if they're done well, and this one was done well, at least people I thought I did it well, others thought I did it well. I didn't get along particularly well with my mother-in-law. She was a hard woman in various ways. She always wanted to change me. I don't know if she ever liked me. But I did the eulogy. But the funny thing about a eulogy is you are at the end of an individual's life, and you are trying to capture the essence of the individual. Who was that person? Actually, you're not trying to speak ill of the dead. I'm not saying that, but you're really trying to understand that person. When I did the eulogy, I did it for my mother-in-law, and we talked a lot about the family of God, being adopted into the family of God, and we talked about oikos and para-oikos, and we were strangers, Ephesians 1. We were strangers, we were aliens, right? We're no longer aliens outside the house of God, but we are brought into the house of God. And in my Father's house there are many mansions, right? There's space for all of us there. That was kind of the thing. But what was really important to my mother-in-law was the sense of right to life. She was part of the right to life movement. Now, it was never important to me. I mean, it's important to all Christians, right? And the right to choice, and a woman has authority over her own body. All those issues were never really that important to me. But it was very important to my mother-in-law. And she would go down and protest. She was from Grand Rapids, and she was one of those first week of January, freezing cold. She'd be picketing, and she was a school teacher, and she was very quiet, very dignified, so she wasn't like radical. But these things were important to her, and she felt like if these things are important to me, I should foster children and adopt, and that's what she did. And at the funeral was a daughter that she was kind of born, fetal alcohol syndrome, small preemie baby. They took it in and raised the child, put her through Moody Bible Institute, and she married a Nigerian and went on. And I talked about how important adoption was for her. But it comes out of that right to life movement. And at the end of her life, we could see that she had put decades, and this was precious to her. Okay? That was a solid belief for her. Now my wife and I had worked in Nepal. We managed a hospital. We'd worked in Bangladesh, where family planning, so vasectomies, bitubal ligations, all of these things we know a lot about. And I know a lot about in India, for example, they had done so much with abortion through amniocentesis focused on girl babies, that they now have some 30 million more men than women, 30 million. China's very similar. Shocking stuff. But none of this was really super passionate to me where I am going to be deeply involved in that issue. And in fact, as my in-laws were considering adopting this child, they asked Sarah and me if we would sign up to be the parents if something happened to them. I forget that term. Godparents, right? And we were going overseas and had other things, and we said, we really don't think we can do that. And my brother-in-law did that, and his wife. But just to say, for my mother-in-law, she worked at this stuff a lot, right? So Right to Life, and others maybe, it's a big issue for you, and I can understand that. It was never a core issue that anyone at my eulogy, my funeral, would ever highlight and say, Jay was really passionate about right to life and these issues. It was just, and I wouldn't say it was pseudo-self stuff, but it never really the core of who I am. And I want to make a distinction because as we begin to think about issues with immigrants and neighbors and talking about neighbors, most of what you hear, in my opinion, is pseudo-self, bloviation, dogmatism, arrogance, I'm right, you're wrong, let's fight it out, and these hardcore positions that doesn't really feel like the church in a way. Let me give you one last example before we move it down. So I've been in lots of countries and done lots of things, but I was in Tijuana, and I was on the Tijuana side, so San Diego, Tijuana, and I was the details of that. There were about 4 or 5 of us, and one of our group was a Guatemalan woman, and the 2 of us stopped, and we had ice cream at a place called La Michoacana. And I don't know if you have La Michoacana in Glen Ellen. Elgin has about 10. It's an ice cream. It's a franchise. And they're all over Mexico, and they're all over Elgin. And I said, La Michoacana, let's get ice cream. So we were standing there at the border wall, having ice cream, wading in the water, playing. There were fireworks. There was a bullfight inside. We didn't go in. And we were right there. We took pictures at the wall. But we were on the Mexican side of the wall, right? 2, 3 years later, 4 years later, whatever it was, Trump comes up. He says, I'm going to build the wall. And you can't build the wall. You have to build the wall. And part of the wall is built. So you can't build the wall, right? And you can't oppose the wall because the wall was there. So you're trying to nuance what do people actually think and believe, but it's I'm against the wall and for the wall, which made kind of no sense to me. But that was sort of that pseudo-self. I'm fighting, I'm representing, etc. Let me give you one example. My father was Roman Catholic, my mother was Protestant. My father said on it would be my mother's side, so my grandparents, great-grandparents, on that side, they were Blakes, and they had come to America early 17th century, so 1630. They were part of that, Puritan group that left, and they had been Congregationalists, and they had been abolition, all that stuff. But they didn't like Roman Catholics, and they didn't like my father at all in that way. But I didn't grow up with that stuff. But a movie's coming out, Belfast, and we talked about Tazes. The Taze brothers in Nepal asked Sarah and I, said, help us. The Mennonites, you got this divide in Nepal, and it basically, because the missionaries came from England, so the Catholics and the Protestants didn't get along, and the Taze brothers are like, you Mennonites got to help us work on this stuff. Yeah. But people grow up hearing, I'm anti-Catholic, and you think, how do you know much about it? 5, 6, 7-year-old kids, and they might be racist, they might be this, they might be that. Well, what's happening? It's what Jesus is getting at. What are they saying in the marketplace? And people pick up this stuff. Now the marketplace has changed. We can get on TikTok, or we can get on Instagram or the news, right? And the first point I want to make is whenever we get into this area, be very careful. One, what do I really think about this? What do I believe? If someone was doing my eulogy, what would they say about reaching out to neighbors, loving neighbors, kind to people, accepting all people? And how did that play out? And then to separate out all this hullabaloo that we've heard elsewhere. It's really important. That's my first point. I know it's long, but it's so important because you can get caught up in that stuff. And your sermon was so excellent this morning to really illustrate that difference about sort of this minority view. But what are people getting into? And you can have strong positions, but what are the underlying values, beliefs, and concerns below it? So Philippians 2:4, look not to, you're not a vain, ambitious, selfish conceit, etc. Look not to your own interests, but look to the interest of others. What are their underlying interests and beliefs? And a simple illustration, two neighbors are fighting, dogs barking, 10 o'clock, the one neighbor knocks on the door. That barking dog has to go, right? That's a position. And the neighbor responds, I'm keeping my dog, slams the door. They're at a conflict. Well, there's probably a win-win. And the one comes over, you can think of it differently as a neighborly conversation. And you say, it's 10 o'clock, Tim, it's really late. Can we do something about the noise? I'm trying to sleep. My wife's trying to read. Is there anything we can do about the dog? He said, yeah, and it is barking. There's a raccoon went by or whatever. I'll put her in the basement and I'll give her a bone. She'll be quiet. So I get my dog. I want my dog. It's important. And you get your peace and quiet. But what are you doing? You're moving from those hard positions. The dog goes, the dog stays. What is the real value and underlying principles that we believe? So we move from all this, yes, a wall, not a wall, yes, a wall, not a wall. What do we really want to do here? What do we believe? What's important to us? So that's kind of a long introduction. Pseudo-self, solid self. Be careful getting into these conversations that you're just arguing your pseudo-self against their pseudo-self, and you're wondering why you're not getting anywhere, as you said on the Thanksgiving morning, right? How do you ask a different question? How do you dig a little more into the issues? Black Lives Matter. How do you get beyond that? I'll say more about it. All right. Second one, this is a story. It's an odd story, but I want to think about it. So we had a lot of graduations this year. I had a daughter graduate. I have a second daughter at home. She turned 17 on Wednesday, and there was no way we were going to get her up, but she would have loved the service this morning. I'm so sorry, but it was just, we were leaving at 7:15, and we tried, and will there be singing? Oh, yes, it's big, beautiful church. She thought she just couldn't do it. There's no way. So anyway, but we had another daughter. I have 4 children, but one daughter, she graduated from high school this year, and she's out in Virginia, but we were doing graduation. She goes to Elgin Academy, which is an independent school. And the class was kind of small, maybe 40 or less, and they said, let's all go to everyone's graduation party, all the aunts and uncles. So there was a commitment that the whole group of them, whenever, wherever, they're all going to go, right? So it was fun. So we, as parents, we got invited to a lot. We were up in Barrington Hills, so we're kind of in the old part of Elgin. I'll say more about, we've been living overseas and we work in nonprofits, so we don't have much money, so we could afford Elgin when we moved in. We moved in to Elgin. Our kids go to a very nice school. It costs us a lot, but we're kind of low income for the school, right? We're on scholarships and some of the stuff. But Barrington Hills, I don't know if you know that area. There's South Barrington, there's Barrington Hills. Well, this was the epitome of Barrington Hills. It's a beautiful place. And they had, there's a pool, there's horses, there's just amazing. And we were there, and to feed everyone, they brought in a taco truck. You've seen these. They pulled it in. Makes sense, right? So all the parents are here. The kids are in the pool. and the food's at the taco truck. So I go down to this taco truck, and the guy is there. We were together, right? So you know this story. And I said, well, I'll have a beefsteak taco with just onion, cilantro, and lime. And he said, they don't want us to serve beefsteak. All we have is chicken or something, pork or something. I don't know what it was, but they didn't have it. But he could tell as soon as I said beefsteak, he knew that if you were really doing a nice party, you'd have beefsteak. You'd never have chicken. I mean, in the Mexican sense, I mean, but in Barrington Hills, you're concerned about your health and this and that. They weren't thinking about money at all. But this guy knew immediately that if you're going to have a real party, like, why would you serve chicken? It's so odd. But he didn't say it. I said, that's fine, I'll have this. So we had some tacos and put some sauce, and it's really good. And I asked him, I said, well, where are you from? I'm just waiting. And he said, oh, I'm from Michoacan. I said, not Michigan? He said, no, but they know the joke.
Yeah.
Often, if people, it's Mexican, right? Mexican era. A lot of people say, they like this joke. They always say, oh, Michigan. It's a funny joke to them. I don't know why, but I've heard the joke before. And he said, no, I'm from Michoacan. I said, I heard that the best cooks that come to America are all from Michoacan. I said, I knew a fellow who, he was working in the big hotels in Las Vegas, and he retired, but he was from Michoacan. I said, I've never been there, but that's what I hear about Michoacan. And so he begins to tell this story. He said, there's a reason for it. He said, Michoacan is down along the coast, the Pacific side, and there's mountains there and other valleys. And he said, it's like 4 or 5 different terrains come together. And so you can get anything and grow anything. And he said the local market then, you might have seafood, but you would have all the cocoa you have all this coming together. And he said, it's really true. I said, oh, that's interesting. I go back a little, I go eat my food to come back again. He said, I have a little beefsteak, I'll give you some. I said, and he pulls it out, and he gives it, and then I said, I need some hot sauce. And I ask about his wife, who made it? And he's, oh, my spouse, mi esposa and all that stuff. And I had some, and I put a lot on, and he said, oh, that's a lot. And I said, oh, that's okay. I really want a lot of hot sauce. He said, he smiles and puts it on. So he ladles it on, and it's great. He said, it's going to be really hot. Can I give you something? And I said, what's that? And he reaches down and he pulls out a Modelo. Well, nobody at this party, this is high school graduation. Most people would have, $100 bottles of wine, whatever they typically drink. Nobody has anything. And I come walking up with these tacos and this beer. And these parents are looking and saying, where'd you get the beer? And I said, well, I got it from the taco truck. And they're like, does he have beer? I said, I don't think he has beer, but he just gave me one. So I want to just pause a little bit and talk about that. Let me get some response. When you hear that story, what do you think about that story? There's a couple of real learnings in that story, but what are the learnings in that story for you? We're talking about welcoming the neighbor. I love the story.
I think you connected on things that were common and important to both of you.
Yeah, and what are those things that were common and important?
Food.
Food. And a real basic understanding of food at that level.
I think humor.
Yeah, humor.
Openness.
Yeah, openness.
Because I imagine the taco person was there to do a job, and he had a public face.
Yeah.
And you were able to reach him as a person, not as a vendor.
Yeah, great.
But in a way that wasn't trying to be a crowbar, right?
Yeah.
Because I work public facing, and I can tell sometimes like people are just trying to do that and like really hard, and it's not working, and they keep pushing. I'm like, look, I just have a job to do.
I love that phrase, the crowbar.
Yeah.
The relationship, people are on their guard about the relationship. And if you push it, it can be a crowbar. That's a really important point.
I think you had appreciation and curiosity in a way that wasn't overbearing. You know, I mean, you weren't trying to put yourself first. You were just engaging with this person and just appreciating them.
Yeah.
And often that relationship of like, he's in the taco truck, so he's kind of this, you know, he's not really even a person, right? He's a server. And you dealt with him with appreciation.
Yeah. A real understanding. He has a life. He's living out that life, has a real job. It's kind of a normal thing. We were here, and I kind of migrated, and I'm working, and you could have moved there would have been lots of follow-up with that. You know, it could have been, how's the truck going? Do you have any trouble with that? You have a Chevy. Do you have any trouble with that? Like, we share this in common, right? If you have a big Chevy, does it suck fuel? That would be, you see what I mean? But that's exactly right. We share a common humanity, and you're trying to kind of connect at that way, and you could do it. The humor, yeah. Any other comments on that?
Well, everybody said this one way or another, but he felt, I think, when you asked the question, hey, I'm more important than the food.
Yeah.
And you communicated that to him, and that just changed the whole relationship instantly.
Yeah.
You left the way out.
As opposed to standing there, where's my food? Hurry up. You know, don't get it salty.
Yeah.
Don't get it, you know, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Is it dirty? You know, you're kind of looking. Yeah, right. Is there cockroaches? But you know what I mean? I mean, that's often the case for the American going into the situation. You're concerned about your health. You're concerned about.
You forget the value of the person, and you're most everyone's preoccupied with the service.
Yeah.
So you were unusual in that you valued the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You left the way out. Because if he didn't wanna, if he just was tired, or he just felt like I don't wanna, you didn't wanna engage, there was a way to be like, haha, and then that's where it ended.
Yeah.
That would be okay. But kind of like, I try to think of it like a ping pong. You try to like actually get it so the other person can actually hit it back.
Yeah.
And
It's a great comment, and that opening question about where you are from, that one has to be worded very carefully. It's a very difficult question, and I can't remember how I got into that. And sometimes there's a little bit of indication that you can get into that.
It could be invasive.
Well, it can be extremely invasive, and if there's any hint, I'm trying to figure out if this guy's documented or not documented. You know, when you come in it with that, then it is a difficult, but that's the question. How do you get into it? And I can't remember how we asked, but I asked, you know, out of curious where you're from.
Yeah, and I be careful with that question like you, because I've been approached with that at gas stations. So I'm putting gas in my car and I have people come up to me and say, well, where are you from? And I grew up in Downers Grove. I was born in Oak Park. I mean, so where am I from? I'm from Downers Grove.
Yeah.
You know?
But there are two sides to that, don't you think? There are people who want to know where you're from because they are kind of fear-based or whatever. But for you, and I think for people here, sometimes if you don't ask, then you're going to be withdrawn and you're not going to make a connection at all. So how do you go out of that fear to be, you really appreciate the person.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might make a mistake in how you ask. But you know what? If you have good intention and you really want to know them, you'll get through that.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean,
for on your side of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the side of the person of color, it can become a question, like you said, are you trying to find out if I'm documented? Why are you asking me this question? Are you so right?
And there
your
could be those
intentions
people.
might be good, and if you ask me, I'm happy to tell you, but that's not. It depends. It's the
And
situation.
I would say that I would never, and maybe it's a good time to transition. Well said. And I like the crowbar image here, because that feels a little bit crowbar-ish to me. And the second thing, I'll use your language like a real person. There has to be a fundamental respect. And I'm going to move toward respect a little bit. You have to really respect the individual. So respect, I'm going to just say my understanding of respect. So we have, our neighbor is Mexican, a family, and the father died this past summer. It was really horrible. His name was Trinidad, and his firstborn son, of course, was called Junior, and his son is called Junior as it goes down. And he was a heavy equipment operator, and probably got,
Asbestosis, maybe?
it wasn't asbestos, but it was some lung issues and emphysema and all of that. And there were two things about the neighbor. So on our other side, we live predominantly in a Mexican neighborhood, so there were several things I learned. But the first thing is, I learned that my theory was, and I learned this a lot from overseas and different stuff, but the neighbors probably don't want to have a real close relationship. Americans typically kind of like their house and their yard. They like to know the neighbors. They like to know that the neighbors will watch the house. They like to know that the neighbors will call if something's up. But they probably don't want to do too much beyond that. They kind of want to have their life and let us have that life. At least that was my preliminary thoughts. But we wanted to be on good terms with our neighbors always, to know them, to greet them. We have trees that we have to trim together. Kids kicked a ball, broke the window. We had to go fix it, some of these things. And this neighbor, this family, the father just liked to have his yard looking immaculate. And I'm the guy who mows the lawn and stuff, and I'm just not that interested. But anyway, I keep up with it. But he would have the blower, the trimmer, all this. And if I'm out and I'm cutting the yard, if a little bit of grass would get on his side, he would come out and blow it. And part of it, he just doesn't want it to get, and I would kind of finish mowing and then come do it. And I didn't take it as malicious. And he didn't mean it that way. And he's kind of out being helpful, as well. And if there would be winter and then the snow would come, he'd be glad to come over, and we'd kind of go over and we'd go back. But we always had the sense that he's much happier with a little bit of distance there. He doesn't want to be like, sharing ethnic food or anything like that. And really respecting his right to privacy and his right to distance, I think is profoundly important in that side. It's really important. As I'm a neighbor and I come to America and we're like, we want to welcome them. Well, actually, they probably don't want to be welcomed per se, in the sense people coming over, I just want to greet you and stuff like, well, I'm at the gas station. Why would you just come greet me? It's kind of an odd thing to do. Like if you're an American and you're in another country, like Bangladesh, people are swarming you, and you don't want to be swarmed. I think that's a second point of respect. I think that's really important. All right, who are others? I want to finish. I know what our time, and then I'll open it up. We have at 9:45. I want to say a little bit about broader issues, and this is going to be a little more difficult, but I'm going to move from respect into this area. So Friday night, I work in Lombard, and there's a couple of Muslim restaurants that I go to, and I know them. These are all men. There's no women in these places. I mean, this is the real Muslim thing. Often they're chewing pan. Sarah will just tense up at the thought. These are hard. Food is delicious, but I know the people, and I'll go in and I'll talk to the people and stuff. And let me just say a little. It's kind of hard to get here, but it's going to be important. But it's important to understand. So for the average, I think, South Asian Muslim, and particularly for the South Asian Hindu, I'll say, by and large, they wouldn't think America has that much to offer. Now, I have to be really careful here. So if you're a Hindu from India, you will just think of the culture of the West as so inferior, it's almost incomprehensible. You just think of it as so inferior. Like, you don't even think of it as culture. When you look at the food, you wouldn't think of their food as much, and the language. And I'll give just one example. The funeral pyre in Varanasi along the Ganges, where they burn the dead, right? Varanasi's or Benares, two names. That fire has been burning for over 2,000 years and has never gone out. People have maintained that fire. They lit the fire millennium ago, right? Centuries and centuries, several thousand years ago. And the caste system and others are there that ensures that that thing keeps going. Now, that's just one fire, right? To give you the sense, there was a mosque was built in the town of Yoda. It was when Akbar the Great came in, and they tore down this Hindu temple, built this mosque. The mosque was built in like 1560 or something. In the early 90s, fundamental Hindus came in, tore down the mosque, put it up, and the government said, well, the mosque was new, so it makes sense to go back. So it had been there 400 plus years. Well, that's nothing. I mean, in the culture. So when people come, Americans often think we have wonderful this and wonderful that. People have come, they can make a good living in America. They like that, right? And they can carve out lives in a way. But the real sense that we have culture or understanding, people are not really that interested in that side of it. And part of the respect, now this is hard to get, is the sort of belief that, I'm doing it, I have my life, I come to America, there's opportunity, I can take it. But whether it's the Mayflower or whatever, not much interest in that side. And you have to be, I think, Americans have to be far more comfortable with that perception. Another way you might put this is, if you would ask the average Spanish speaker, Dominican Republic, Guatemalan, whatever, do you think English is a prettier language or Spanish? I mean, it wouldn't even be a question. They would almost laugh. Would you rather sing in English or Spanish? They would be like, well, it's obvious we're going to be singing Spanish in heaven. So why in the world would you ever think English? And it's a little bit hard. Another way to think about this is often individuals, the classic example is the Japanese or others, who would think of Americans as kind of smelly, hairy, dirty, wearing shoes in the house. I mean, all of these things, you would just think of the average American as such a filthy person. You would just be so creeped out about it. In the Hindu context, you would never share a drink. You'll see people sharing drinks. Oh, can I have a bite? Like, it is inconceivable that you wouldn't even touch someone. Like in Nepal, you wouldn't shake hands. You would never reach out a hand and touch someone. You do namaste to make sure you have a distance. Americans, grabbing and all this. It's hard to understand that perception and to be comfortable with the fact that people just don't really care that much about it. They don't care about the history. The freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, these are some core issues they can really identify with. Bill Gates, that technology side, that's something that's impressive. But by and large, Western culture, not much interest in any of that. It's a hard thing to say, but I think it's really important for us because there needs to be a healthy sense. I go back to that passage in Philippians, with humility and patience, bear with one another, some of those things, but, look to the interest of others. There needs to be a little sense of humility, I think, on that side for us. And that one's a little bit hard. I know I said I go to this Muslim restaurant. They have a school, they have a mosque, they have everything. Western culture to them would be so decadent. The treatment of women, our clothing, our behaviors. It's so decadent in their thinking. It's not, I mean, people are uncovered and, you know, they don't keep women. That's kind of their mindset. It's a very different mindset. But just to say, oh, we're neighbors, let's embrace. Boy, that's the crowbar stuff. I mean, all right. There's a lot more. Let me say one or two last points, and then I'll finish. That comes out of my own personal experience. You may disagree. If someone comes from Ireland, England, Germany, Holland, they'll look at the cheese, they'll look at whatever they look at, the coffee, you know, it'll be one nonstop complaint about Americans. It's hard to accept, but I want to say a little bit about immigration. The first time I really experienced immigration was in Nepal. I was 20 years old. It was 1983. A young man had lost his father. They were Kham muggers, which you won't know, but really in the village, sort of, typically they would become Gurkhas with the British Army when that was happening. Really something of a people. This family sold everything they had to buy a passport, and he was going to go work in Dubai, migrant labor. And you'll see next year, Qatar, the World Cup soccer, all of that is built immigrant labor. Filipino, South Indian, Bangladeshi, Nepalese. Almost every family in Nepal has, for the past 200 years, sent some family members out of the country because you cannot live on the mountains of Nepal and grow enough food to survive. You must have remittances to keep it going. Mexico is that way. Every family might farm, might have a business, whatever. The family is farming because of remittances. So you can do a little bit, but the gap between what you need and what you can earn on your own never reaches it. So if you can look at the numbers, I think it's $5 billion a year from the U.S. to Mexico. These are Mexican families giving back. The Nepalese would be the exact same. Everybody's migrant. This fellow lost his passport, basically lost everything. It was so gut-wrenching. But you have to understand that all of these countries, like Mexico, a Guatemala, a Nepal, where they are growing corn on the side of a mountain, that will not work. Those countries have to do something drastically different. It's absurd. You look at Iowa, you look at Illinois, and you think they're competing against this Nepalese farmer that quite literally is putting one corn seed at a time into a mountain. You know, one field might be this wide, the next one is 10 foot higher, and they're only this big, right? I mean, just gut-wrenching. None of those countries are going to be doing the same thing. In Guatemala, they're moving toward cardamom, they might move toward coffee and other cash crops. There'll be a little bit of that. We could talk more about the significance of that. In Haiti, they're doing a little bit with spices for perfume, and some will move in that direction. But this issue of how do you move forward in the 21st century when you're living in a land that will not sustain you. You can look at Madagascar right now. The whole thing's kind of a flop, basically. And what's going to happen with Madagascar? Haiti's a different story, and I want to say a little bit about that. Nigeria, I've spent a lot of time in Nigeria. The population of Nigeria is 200 million. In 2035, it will be 300 million. The average median, that'll be as big as the U.S. That's basically 15, 20 years. They're going to add 100 million people. The median age in Nigeria is 18. Basically, half the population is under 18. You go to school, okay, you said go to school, I went to school, I have good grades. Now it's time, I want my cell phone, I want my wife, I want my family, I want my job. It's 100 million people. What's going to happen? Bangladesh, 175 million people, size of Wisconsin. Take half the U.S., cram them into Wisconsin.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. That's Nigeria moving forward. Okay? The issue of how do we welcome the stranger as the church is going to be so hard in a way. But just to think about it, other countries, Uganda, very similar to Nigeria, just this massive growth. I know I'm watching my time, I'm mindful. I got one quick story. In Haiti, after the earthquake, I was there. I could tell story after story about the earthquake. Church of the Brethren had a mission we grew, built 200 homes, gut-wrenching. And Pat Robertson said, the earthquake happened because it was a cursed country. Remember that story?
Oh, yeah.
I asked him, he said it, because of the voodoo, right? Sold their soul to the devil. And I asked someone about it, and they said, we are a cursed country. And I was shocked. We're a cursed country because we can't walk to the United States like Mexico or Guatemala. And that much of that route, now you're seeing Haitians do anything and everything they can to get to Central America to come up. And that, you could look at the numbers, the boats and others, because the whole country is basically collapsed. But they see, it's a phrase that helps you think, how do we have access? So if you're from Nigeria, if you're from Bangladesh, you're from Nepal, or you're from Haiti, how does the U.S. policy feel to you? It feels so discriminatory that they hate America because of it. I just want us to be aware as the church that when we celebrate those trains, we are saying no Nigerians, no Bangladeshis, no Nepalese, and very few Haitians. We've chosen that. That's our choice. And it's not welcome, it's not liked. I want us to think a little differently about that issue. It's a hard issue for us. Our brother-in-law is Nigerian. We spend a lot of time
How
with
do
that.
we solve it?
And I just posed the question. This is where we're going to finish with pseudo-self, solid self. Who are we as a church? And who are we as a nation and the people? It's just a very difficult thing, but it's going to cost us. It's going to be a hard thing, and it's going to cost us. But that's why we started with pseudo-self. We're going to have to really get to the core of who we are. And how much time and energy are we going to put into it, and what's it going to look like? Anyway, I know I went long, and we're probably there.
So here's the, in a few minutes,
Are we
maybe in
okay?
about 5 minutes, we'll,
Oh, good. I
5
didn't
minutes,
know.
we'll disconnect the Zoom, but this conversation can continue for those who want to stay. I mean, 15 minutes easily,
Oh.
if you want to.
Oh,
But-
good.
but
I
the
didn't know
Zoom-
what the
But
time
the Zoom
was.
has to end in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thought. And if we have one last time, I'll throw one other ugly piece into the puzzle. So in Nepal, it became very apparent, and Haiti is this way. I read an article about it this morning. Haitians were paying $250 to get from Haiti to Central America by boat, and that's expensive. For most Haitians, they earn $2 a day. $2 a day. So that's $700 a year. $250. That's, families, kids, a lot of people are taking that $2 and pulling at it. Most families, the thought of coming up with $250 to make that trip is just daunting. And we saw this in Nepal. The people who are doing migrant labor, this is not the poorest of the poor. And the individuals coming up, I think, from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, it's slightly different. Mexico, it's slightly different. But we always have to remember that if, for example, we get Nepalese immigrants, Indian immigrants, Bangladeshi immigrants, Nigerian, this is the cream of the crop. We are taking the middle class, we're taking the educated, we're taking those with some means. We don't care about the lower level, the really struggling people who are in Bangladesh. You work in the morning, you get a meal, you work all afternoon, you get money to take home to your family and have a second meal. That's life. There's no gap. to get out of that and say, oh, I'm going to just get a passport and I'm going to go, right? The subsistent level people, they don't have the opportunity to even think about migration. And I want to just put that puzzle in too, because we often think, oh, we're helping the poor, and compared to us, the immigrant is typically poor. But often the immigrant is not the poorest of the poor. They're the family, if they can come, often are seeking money to get the remittances back. But the real poor, and the Episcopal Disaster Relief and some of the development agencies, we know better, do so much good work around the globe. I talked about Heifer. Some of these agencies are so important. The Episcopal Diocese of Milwaukee, for example, is doing so much work in Haiti themselves. Has a school, there's a pharmacy or a clinic, a health clinic that they're doing. It's just that. And those things are really important to be part of as well. I just want to plug that in because often the real needs are in the country and how do you support? Anyway, so I guess I just sucked out the time of the whole hour, but.
I've got a quick question. To get from Haiti to Central America, two questions. I mean, is it closer? See, in my mind, I can't exactly place how close Haiti is to Central America. So, is that the only way that they can get to America? That would be one. And then, secondly, does Central America accept the people on this boat coming to, to a country in Central America? Because I'm thinking they wouldn't be accepted to come on a boat from Haiti. They'd have to have some kind of, in the U.S.
Yeah, they wouldn't be allowed into Miami. It used to be there was some allowance for individuals from Cuba, but that's the issue. And how they get through. Historically, it's been much more through Panama, and you arrive in Panama and make the trip up. We knew a number of Haitians. I went to visit in Tijuana once. They were called in to go help with building the stadiums in Brazil for the World Cup. And they weren't going to go back to Haiti after that, and made their way up through Venezuela and then Colombia and whatever. And they got to Tijuana and then got stuck, and they started selling door to door little goods, and they thought, oh, it's such a good living. They thought, oh, we're going to settle in Tijuana. It's such a good place to make business. And they settled there. Isn't that the oddest story? I don't know much. I mean, just from where the earthquake was in Jamel, down that area, then they move along the Caribbean and different islands and sort of end up there. But they're shipping and moving and part of that. But I don't know the details of that.
Can I, as an optimistic pessimist, could I ask, have you seen success stories that might teach us lessons in this culture?
Well, I think we have lots of success stories. I think in general we do well with migration. And I think in general, I think England and Europe has more difficulty with immigration. The Dutch have more difficulty. In Sweden, they want people to be Swedish. You know, you have a big Muslim community in Lombard. Nobody really cares. There's a big school there. Our kids play them in school, big high school, big mosque. They're probably going to build in them. But you don't really care in some ways, do you?
No.
Yeah, see, you're not trying to retain a culture, like, in some sense. Like Americans are just more, and Midwesterners in particular, are just very relaxed about that stuff. So all of our neighbors are Mexican, and Elgin functions really in a great way, right? I mean, we love being in Elgin in that sense. I mean, it's just such a great place. I mean, Elgin's a good example. If you go to, like, the average McDonald's, Myers, car parts store in Elgin, you typically have a Mexican-American individual. They're bilingual. They're often in their 20s, local high school. Kids are so sharp and so helpful and so fast that as soon as you get out of Elgin, you're like, well, boy, that service was slow. But you expect, like, you have to return something at the local Target. Oh, I know how to do it. Here's your credit card. Here's this. Happy smile. And it moves so fast. So I think there's great success stories. But I do think as we move forward, Madagascar, Nigeria, Haiti, we have to think about this stuff. And we have to think soberly. How can we really be helpful in it?
But I just want to say that the reaction to our Black Lives Matter sign, the negative one, is mostly from white people. It's all from white people
Yeah.
who are disturbed by it.
Yeah.
It's not.
No, it's a good.
I actually
it's a
did have
very serious
an
point.
African American. I did have a black gentleman come in. He had an issue with it too.
Okay, well, there's
Good
that.
one.
What?
But that said, I'm going to interrupt because literally all my readers are here because you guys are amazing and actually do what I ask you to do because they rock my socks. So I'm going to have to, I'm so sorry, shut down at this point, and I literally have to shut down the meeting and restart it for my readers. Thank you so much for being so awesome and being here. I promise I'll restart it right. And thank you, Jay. This has been amazing. And thank you all.
Yeah, and I